All right, let's begin in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. 2 Timothy 3, verse 12. It's familiar to us. You'll recognize it instantly when you see it there. 2 Timothy 3:12. Who will read that for us or quote it? Go ahead, Elijah.
Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution.
Okay, so this lesson, and really a lot of the workbook, is about the idea of facing the opposition of the world and really facing persecution from the world because of what we believe, what we practice, and how we are different from the world around us. And one of the things that the workbook had talked about is pressure from non-believers in the world that we would keep our faith to ourselves, that they don't want us to express it, that not only do they not want us to share it, but they don't want us to express it really in any way. And so question number 1 in the workbook is the workbook description of how religiously conservative candidates for public office are treated in the public media the same as your own assessment. So it described public candidates, so political candidates, how the media kind of gets them or goes after them with gotcha questions about religion. Do you see that in our society, whether it's political candidates or otherwise? Okay, I got 1 or 2 maybe. Yes, Jim?
I don't see it all that often, but I do see it. And it's really apparent once they turn the switch on, that's the direction they're going, the moderator or whatever, that they're looking for the person they're talking to say something that has some substance for them to come back really as a challenge to what they're saying, what they're claiming. And it's like, is there really no one in that business that has any faith at all?
Right, exactly. So they'll do that sometimes in debates to try to trip them up. Carrie?
I was thinking more along the line of when in recent past there's been people who've been kind of questioned who are going to be on the Supreme Court and how they have been kind of ripped apart for their beliefs and their stance on various subjects.
Right. It used to be a universal thing. You could guarantee this is going to happen. If somebody's up for Supreme Court, they're going to ask them about Roe v. Wade. Is it settled law? And I personally am convinced that if certain people who went up for the Supreme Court didn't outright lie, they did some serious mental gymnastics to get through that kind of thing and to get through that questioning. But yes, I think of justices, judges. They get the gotcha questions when they go before like a Senate committee or something. Politicians will, when they're being interviewed, they'll try to trip them up and get them to say something that they can then use as a club against them. Well, see here, they don't respect people's rights to do X, Y, Z, and they're going to oppress you. They're going to enslave you. They're going to put us back in the dark ages. And it seems to me the more the position is an influential position or has potential for that, the more they want to get that person and not let them speak up and go after them. Any other thoughts there? Remember the famous case? I think it was in Washington State. It might have been Oregon, but either one of them, I mean, it's just different shades of insanity. You know, a high school football coach, after the game, would go out on the field. His players who wanted to would gather around him and he'd say a prayer. And I think it was some type of atheist group. I forget the name of it. They went after him for that and sued him, and he lost his job, I think it was. I mean, all kinds of things like that. But that's what we're talking about. Not only do they not want you to share what you believe, but they don't want you to even practice what you believe, where any other human being can see that. And if you influence others along the same lines, it really triggers them to go against that. It can be common in community groups as well. And what I mean by that is on the job, right? On the job, there are certain corporations and then certain offices. And I know there's some variations within these things, even within a corporation, depending on who your direct boss and your fellow colleagues are. But sometimes they don't want anything said about religion, about God, about the Bible, about Jesus Christ. They don't want anything at all mentioned in the workplace. And you could be written up for that.
Irony in that is the moral things are off topic, but none of the immoral things are off topic. You know, allowed to talk about your faith, your religion, without getting written up or made light of. You can talk about all the bad stuff you did with your buddies on the weekend, and that's somehow acceptable. And it's just that double standard that makes being faithful challenging at times.
Right, absolutely does. It sure does. So let's go to Acts 16, Acts chapter 16. One of the things I want us to notice is that this same attitude was present in the first century. In Acts chapter 16, of course, Paul and Silas in verse 16, they're at Philippi, they're going around, they're preaching, they're teaching. They've made some progress. They're at Philippi with Lydia and her household. And this is the occasion where Paul casts out the spirit of divination from the girl, and her owners are angry about that. And so they grab Paul and Silas and take them to the magistrate. So let's read Acts 16, verses 20 to 23 and see what unfolds here. I want us to think about something that's happening here that perhaps we haven't really considered before. But Acts 16, 20 through 23. Who's got that? Ron.
And they brought them to the magistrates and said, These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city, and they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. Then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely.
Okay. What was the motivation of the masters? Why are they so angry? In reality, Ron?
Well, follow the money.
Okay.
They felt that their profits were going to be threatened because
Right.
of the teaching.
Right. Verse 19, they are furious because their profit's gone, because this spirit of divination is no longer in the slave girl and the parlor trick kind of stuff that she did before, and whatever that spirit was doing with her, that's gone. She doesn't have that ability anymore. But when they take her before the magistrates, what's their charge? Or take Paul and Silas before the magistrates, what's the charge laid against them?
The charge is that they're teaching customs and practices contrary to what they are holding to.
Okay. They're bringing these things, these customs that it's not lawful for us as Romans to receive or observe. That, at this point, as far as we know, is the only thing the magistrates heard. These guys are teaching something they're not supposed to be teaching. And then how do the magistrates react to that?
They tear off their clothes and they, use rods on them.
Yeah,
So immediately it appears that their reaction was just violent.
Exactly. They have them beaten and thrown into prison. So what we see in the attitude around us today, hey, there's things we don't want you talking about. It was very evident in the first century, prevalent in the first century. So we're not the first ones to face this. Now, any other thoughts there? Ron?
Well, were you going to comment further on this particular text?
I was not. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that it also teaches us a great lesson about how Paul used the law to his defense.
Yes.
And I'll allow you to elaborate on that, but he recognizes, you unlawfully, unjustifiably beat us as Romans.
Right. Evidently, when they did it, he didn't have opportunity to say, wait a second. But then later, when they calmly come to escort him out, he says, it's not happening. We're Romans, uncondemned. And that put the fear of God into the magistrates to come and escort them out.
And as we were talking about, their response was an emotional, immediate response. They didn't go through what they should have gone through in a protocol of law.
Exactly. And we do see that in our society as well, that sometimes an employer or a government agency or whatever it is, they have an emotional, instantaneous reaction to someone, and then all that goes through the court system, and the person they've gone against because of their faith, because of a statement or something, it gets thrown back. So they're justified in saying they're right. They need to be given back pay or whatever it may be. But it's just that spirit that's out there that says, in a secular society, we don't want to hear about religion. We don't want y'all talking about those things. Now, question number 4 is, why is secular humanism considered objective or religiously neutral, whereas those opposing secular humanism are asked to keep their religious beliefs to themselves? So what's that perspective of secular humanists that they say, look, we're objective and we know the proper way to look at things? Why is that? What's their perspective?
Their perspective is they consider themselves to be intellectually superior.
Okay.
And it's going on within our own nation as we look at those that are influencing the direction of law and the economy. They consider themselves elitists.
Yes, they very much behave as elitists and look down on, the common country bumpkin. There was, the famous saying, the deplorables, right? Back in, was it 16, in that election cycle? And then people, you can see this very plainly, people who live in the Northeast in particular, sorry if this hits anybody's family or maybe you, but they're snobs up in New York City thinking that people who live down in North Carolina literally don't have shoes. They think everybody here is just a backward country hick, doesn't know anything. You barely add 1 plus 1. You don't understand bigger global issues, and so we can tell you what you need to believe and how your life best needs to be lived, and that is without religion. Is specific to our topic, Ron.
Stephen, I was going to say, too, during the period of time that the Kennedy family had such influence in this country, they certainly had that air about them, and many recognized them for that. We know what's better for you than you know yourself.
Right, exactly right. They think we're incapable of making decisions, living our lives in the best way. So one of the things is they see themselves as rational because, and this goes back to the Enlightenment. This goes back to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, all those things. Well, we can rationally investigate something, as he talks about in the workbook about the scientific method. We can rationally go through those things and either prove something true or prove something false. And so their idea is, well, we're rational and you are irrational. We're rational because we look at science you're irrational because what you're believing in, what you're advocating can't be proved. That's their idea. Now, it can be proved, as well as any other thing can be proved. If you take the whole field of how to prove something to be true, how do you prove that Washington crossed the Delaware? Who was there? Who can repeat that in an experiment? Well, nobody can do that. How do you know that he did it? Well, the way you know he did it is how? History, testimony. Whether it's from him or from anybody else, yeah, we did this. So, but they don't think that is valid when it comes to religious matters and issues. And so they think they have something that is provable and rational, and we're just irrational people. But here's the thing about it. Deviations from godly values are not only encouraged, but they are celebrated. So godly values, you're told to keep that to yourself. But if you are a pervert, you need to come out and let the whole world know it. In fact, we need to have a parade where all the perverts get together and go through a city and declare how proud they are to be that way. It's celebrated. Companies celebrate it. We talked about this before, but let's notice 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter 4, and then I want to just posit something for you. 1 Peter 4, verses 3 and 4. 1 Peter 4, 3 and 4. Who will get that? Paul?
For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walk in this lust, drunkenness, drunken parties, and idolatries.
Verse 4.
For in regret to this, they think it strange that we do not run with them in the same flood speaking evil of you.
Okay. So in the first century, society looked at Christians as strange because you didn't go along with them. You didn't have that same flood of dissipation as he said there. Lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, abominable idolatries. And they would look at Christians and think, you people are weird. There's something wrong with you. So in other words, they celebrated deviations from godliness and condemned godliness. Same thing. So today, of course, as we said, there's this encouragement of and celebration of an alternate lifestyle. And now there is this encouragement of and celebration of gender choice. And as though somebody could identify as something they literally are not. This is from people who say they're rational. And it's gotten so bad, there are people who say, I'm a cat, I'm a dog, I'm a wolf, I'm a whatever. It's gotten to the point, hopefully, that the rest of society is going, wait a second. That just doesn't make any sense at all. That's not rational. So they want us to stay quiet while they celebrate that which is evil and unrighteous. Again, present in the first century, like it's present today. But then it's not just society, it's religious groups as well. As he talks about in that workbook there, that many religious groups have adopted the position of privatizing biblical faith. Does anybody remember one of the examples that he gave? How how did it initially start? Let's go to 1 Corinthians 3 while you're thinking about that. What's one of those things?
Well, if I'm recalling this properly and reading it, it started out with some of the ideas about go to the church of your choice. And
Yes.
so it becomes an individual decision rather than appealing to what is right, absolute truth. And then that further digressed
Yes.
in that we are not to be conflicting with others or challenging others about their own personal beliefs within the church of their choice.
Right, exactly. So 1 Corinthians chapter 3, let's read verses 1 through 7 here and think about the similarity of what Paul was dealing with at Corinth with what we see around us today. So 1 Corinthians 3, verses 1 through 7. Who's got that? Carter?
Brothers and sisters, I cannot address you as people who live by the Spirit, but as people who are still worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not ready yet. For you were not yet ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. You are still worldly, for since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, and are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere humans? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere human beings? What, after all, is Apollos, and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters it is anything, but only God who makes things grow.
Okay. So at Corinth, they were following the path that pleased them. Well, I like Paul. So I belong to Paul. I follow him. I am of Paul. Well, I like Apollos. He's an eloquent speaker. So he's the one I'm going to follow. Follow the person of your choice. Same concept of following the church of your choice or being a part of the church of your choice. It's, in other words, that decision's up to you and what you want and what you like, what appeals to you. Well, what's the problem with that? 1 Corinthians 4, verse 17. 1 Corinthians 4, verse 17. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Carter.
For this reason I have sent to you Timothy, my son whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord. He will remind you of my way of life in Christ Jesus, which agrees with that I teach everywhere in every church.
Okay. He's going to remind you of my ways in Christ. I teach everywhere in every church. What does that tell you?
There's a constancy of purpose with the Word of God, and there's a singular message that was being presented because that's what he means by the way. There is one way, one truth.
Okay. So how can we have the church of our choice and Paul says teach the same thing everywhere in every church?
They're incompatible.
It can't be done, right? Because the churches don't teach the same things. So the church of your choice goes completely contrary just to chapter 4, verse 17. And you go over to chapter 16. Chapter 16, this is echoed here. Verse 1. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. He's just saying another way. I teach everything everywhere in every church. That's what I teach. Same thing. And just as I taught the churches of Galatia, I'm teaching you, here's what you do. Same thing in all the churches. So the doctrine and the practice were the same. The groups were different. Right? The churches of Galatia, each one of those churches were a little different. Corinth was different from them. Ephesus different from them. Thessalonica or the church at Antioch or the church in Jerusalem, wherever, each group is different. But they all had a unity and a harmony in the gospel that was revealed through the apostles and prophets. So let's say this. Is there anything wrong, just take it at the surface level, is there anything wrong if you lived in an area where there are 3 or 4 congregations within driving distance? Say that there was an Ephesus and a Thessalonica and a Colossae and a Philippi. And you said, you know what? I want to go to Philippi. I live a little bit closer to Thessalonica, but I'm going to go to Philippi. Is there anything wrong with that in and of itself?
No.
Because why? They're, in theory, of course, teaching the same thing, practicing the same thing. It's just 2 different groups that are following the same religion of Jesus Christ. And you know what? Maybe I just click better with the people at Philippi. Because it's a reality. We all have a comfort zone with relationships that we have. And sometimes we're closer or we click better with certain people than we do with others. And it's not to say we have a disdain or dislike for anybody. It's just, it's normal. That happens within our families. If any of you ever have family reunions where there's any sizable number of people that show up, there's some people in your family you get along better with than others. And there's some people maybe even in your immediate family, like, I really don't get along with him. And so I just click better with the cousins. So I hang out with the cousins. It's just normal. So there may be other factors, but it's not the factor of, you know what? I like the idea of saved by faith alone, once saved, always saved. So that's where I'm going to go. Mike?
Well, I was going to say, maybe you have a skill that can be better used in one congregation than the other. So to your point, there's a lot of variables that kind of can flow into that. But the main thing, and I think this is what you're pointing out, is that we're faithful members of the Church of Christ.
Exactly right. So if I was a member at Philippi and I decided to go to Thessalonica one day, for whatever reason, that's where I am, I'm headed that way, and I stop in and I worship with them, I'm not going to have an issue. It's not going to be strange. It's going to be like, okay, we're on the same page. It's all good. So, all right, question number 5 was, how does choosing one's own personal faith relate to faith being privatized? What about the idea of choosing your own personal faith?
That to do with, what was it, Philippians 2:12, about working out your salvation, fear and trembling, so that we individually choose to be faithful, but that doesn't necessitate us keeping that to ourselves. It's an individual choice, but it's not to be hidden from others. That's part of the question.
Okay, yeah, we don't hide that, and that's what he's driving toward, this idea. It doesn't matter which group you're with, but then the follow-on is, why are you going to bother me? If it doesn't matter which group you're in, why would you bother me about your beliefs versus my beliefs and have all that? Paul, do you have something?
I don't know where the scripture is.
It's right in front of you, Paul. It is right in front of you, literally.
Not to lead her own path.
Okay, yeah. So Jeremiah 10:23, O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself, is not in man who walks to direct his own steps. Right. Yeah. Philip, do you have something?
I was just along the lines of where you're going with privatization. Like, the way I read what you were saying was the whole church of your choice. You know why that, and it really comes back to, I guess, in my mind, when people take that and they say, okay, this is the church I want to go to. It goes back to what we were talking about a couple of Wednesdays ago, maybe about the absolute truth versus not having absolute truth. And when they decide that's the truth they want to have, it kind of privatizes it because everybody has their own truth. So why are you bothering me with yours? Because that's your truth, not mine.
Right, right. Mike?
I was gonna say, with what, Zach had brought up there in Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, and there's a qualifier to working out your own salvation. You're supposed to do it with fear and trembling.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it goes on to talk about it's God who's working in you for his good pleasure. So it's not just whatever I feel, whatever I think. There's guidelines around that as well. And we have to keep that in mind as we work on ourselves. But, this idea that, well, because I think it and I feel it, therefore it must be correct, is not what's being taught in Philippians chapter 2, verse 12.
Yes, exactly right. And Ron?
Go ahead, I'll comment.
Well, I was going to jump to Ephesians 4. Y'all may go ahead and turn there, but Ron, what you got?
Well, as you were describing this, and one looks at their own personal faith and the privatization of faith, I think, Stephen, recently, at least it's become apparent to me, we see more and more people having their own personal ministry, their own personal works. And as we know, and as Mike was mentioning, these works are what they're looking to because, certainly they're good. And, look at the good that we're doing. But as Paul taught in the Roman letter, it's not meritorious works that we're performing.
Right.
It's doing the will of God.
Well, okay. So I got to deviate here for just a second. I'm following Ron's line here. All right. Are we as individual Christians supposed to work and do things personally, individually, in service to the Lord and to our fellow man?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Are we then to say, I'm doing this on my own and throw the church overboard? Well, I don't need to be part of that. I got my own ministry. Well, no. That's what a lot are doing now. They're in a sense, they're establishing their own church that's them and their spouse, them and their immediate family. And they say, well, that's our ministry. And I have known people, well, they say their business is their ministry. How did you get to that? How do you get to, well, I'm selling widgets and things, and that's my ministry to the world? What you're doing is you're worshiping material things. You just made your own God in that.
I've had an individual tell me basically, you're old-fashioned, you're outdated, things evolve until I point out, show me where the word changed, and then they can't say anything.
Right. Right. Yeah. We're kind of in their mind stuck back. Well, really in the first century. Which, if somebody says you people act like it's first century, yes, that's what we're supposed to do. So Ephesians chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. It's the counter to what we've been saying here. So let's read Ephesians 4, 4 through 6. Who's got that? Elijah?
There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in you all.
Okay. So we won't dig through each of these, but just this idea, these 7 great ones that are listed out here, they're listed because there is a unity. There's not disunity. There is a singleness. There is not a plurality or a multiplicity of these things. But if you look into the religious world around us, they simply cannot agree to this because they believe in many bodies and they believe in many different spirits, many different revelations, many different messages from God. They don't even believe in one hope. There are multiple hopes in the world around us. You know, Jehovah's Witnesses have the hope of life on earth. Well, that's different from my hope. They don't believe in one faith or one baptism. And so, when it says church of your choice and privatizing your faith, this says no. We have to have a personal conviction. We understand that. As Zach was talking about, we have to have this personal conviction and devotion to God. But that's not me deciding privately what my standard or system of religion is. Now, let's go to Romans chapter 14, because I think this trips people up, and if you get into discussions with people in the world around you, they may want to jump into Romans 14 to say, see, we can have differences, and we all just need to get along and not bother each other about it. Okay, so Romans chapter 14, let's begin here. Let's just read verses 1 through 6, and that should give us a pretty good idea of what's going on here. Zach?
As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to him.
Okay. So, receive one who's weak in the faith. What does it mean that somebody is weak in the faith here?
Whatever we're talking about, the subject we're talking about, they don't feel like they can do that and be pleasing to God themselves.
Okay. Yes, Zach?
They're a Christian, just like they're a baptized believer. They're not someone outside of Christ, which I would imagine the audience that is proponent of the things in this book that are contrary to the will of God might be ones who pull Romans 14 and like, listen to the Bible say you're supposed to, accept differences and not burden.
Well, but here's kind of the rub on what you're saying. This is a very good point you're bringing up. That like if you talk to a Baptist, a Methodist, a Presbyterian, they're going to say, well, I'm a Christian. Right. And you're a Christian. And Paul says, we ought to just get along and not worry about it. Again, that's not what Paul's saying here. He is saying, as Zach said properly, we need to get back to what makes a Christian in one sense. But in another sense, to what Mike mentioned, somebody has this belief that is an immature understanding of truth. They're not weak in conviction. In fact, they're very strong in their conviction. So don't think that this is saying somebody who's weak in the faith is somebody who questions, oh, I'm not sure this or that. I don't know really what I believe. No, this guy believes I can't eat meat. and you're a sinner for eating meat. And Paul's writing to address that situation. The guy who eats meat is looking at the guy who doesn't, says, you're a sinner, and you're going to hell because you can't eat pork. He's saying, wait a second, slow down here. So it's weak in understanding, but not weak in conviction. And he says, receive them, but not to disputes over doubtful things. So you don't get them in and harass them about their convictions here. Now, we're going to come back to the idea, I hope we get to it. Doesn't mean you can't study with them. Doesn't mean you can't talk to them. You can't reason with them. Hey, I don't think you understand this here. Let's look at the Word of God. So, verses 3 and 4, it says that God has received him. The one who eats, the one who doesn't eat. God is able to make him stand, the last part of verse 4. Then verses 5 and 6, and the latter part of verse 5 is where people can get tripped up. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. Okay? Now let's back up in the context. In verse 2, all right, let's take out the issue of eating meat or observing a day. And let's plug in adultery. Okay? So, is it proper to say one who lives in adultery, God has received him? One who is a thief, well, God is able to make him stand. A drunkard, an alcoholic who just stays on the bottle all the time. Well, God's able to make him stand. You know, I saw something in the news, you know, this commercial that was shown in the Super Bowl. Y'all heard about that? He Gets Us. It showed artistic rendition, and I didn't see it. I just got a glance of it. It's one of those that makes you want to vomit. They picture Jesus as an effeminate. He gets us. So he's washing feet of trans people, washing feet of, you know, all kinds of sick perverts. Somebody going in to murder their baby at a Planned Parenthood. That's not what this is saying. If you want to murder your child, well, you know what? Don't bother each other about that. Just receive each other. Sandy.
To me, these are things that are not sinful. When you eat meat or just eat vegetables. That's just a matter of opinion. And when you bring sin into it, because I don't think we have a right to judge people, you know, for their various beliefs and like what you eat. But when they're sinning, that's different.
Okay.
And
And here's the thing, Sandy. It's not just your understanding or your view of this. That is Scripture through and through. You know, one of the things is Acts chapter 10, where Peter saw the sheet let down with all those things. One of the lessons in that is, the surface lesson is, God said you can eat whatever you want. Peter said, no, nothing common or unclean as such. No, you can eat it all, Peter. What I've cleansed don't call it. That's the surface lesson. The underlying lesson is the Gentiles being received. But then in 1 Timothy chapter 4, I think it is 1 Timothy chapter 4, he talks about the idea of people trying to stop you from eating. God's given you whatever you want to eat. Go eat it. Give thanks to God. It's all okay. And the observing of the days, Colossians chapter 2. Don't let anybody judge you. Observing the days, Sabbaths, new moons, all those things. Don't let anybody judge you on that. So you're exactly right. That is exactly what the Scripture teaches. These are matters of judgment. I can or cannot do some of these things totally indifferent to God. But there are other things that are clearly sinful that we cannot do. And if you just plug that into this, it jumps out at you realizing, yeah, no, can't put homosexuality or adultery or whatever other thing in there that God has clearly condemned. So when you think about that now, we have a right to a personal conscience on matters of indifference or matters of judgment. I can have that personal conscience. And it could be somebody out of a Seventh-day Adventist background. Say that they're converted and they're a part of this group. And we say, okay, the first Saturday in March, we're going to have a work day here at the building. And they have an issue with that because they've lived their whole life, you shouldn't work on Saturday. And they don't come to that work day. Do we harass them about that? Or do we say, okay, we'll see you Sunday. Not a problem. Yeah. Now, over time, it may be they grow out of that, they mature out of that, they realize, okay, that old law, the Sabbath, it doesn't matter. So my conscience is free now. But we don't want somebody to violate their conscience just because we don't have an issue. Mike.
Yeah, I was thinking whenever I saw the commercial also about how Jesus gets us, and it brought to mind John chapter 2, verse 24. It says, "But Jesus on his part was not entrusting himself to man because he knew the mind of man, he knew what was inside of man." Yeah, he gets us. He knows exactly what we're made of. And
Well, just like that old saying, God knows my heart. Yes, he does, and you better get right. Yes, he absolutely knows your heart. You can't use that as an excuse. So here's the thing about it. Other thing we need to understand before we leave Romans 14 is the person who's weak in the faith cannot be the standard. You can't have the lowest common denominator that rules and their conscience dictates what everybody else does. You have to absolutely squash that in a congregation because it will be a poison and it will completely destroy the work.
To that point where you're going there, Romans 10 and verse 3 says, "For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness." So if we have somebody coming in here and saying, this songbook is sin or sinful to use, we need to get back to sacred selections. That's the only one that God approved of. And we say, okay, we just let that person establish their own righteousness, and now we all have to adhere to their standard instead of God's.
Right. And there are brethren who, more to the point, I haven't heard of that, although it wouldn't surprise me, but that the King James Version is the only version you can use. I know for a fact because I've been confronted on that before. It's like, you have got to be kidding me. Another day, another issue. We can go through that. But yes. All right, so we're just going to have to leave it there. I thank you for the discussion and realizing that we need to live our faith regardless of how others may react, whether they like it or they don't like it.